While in Europe, Mark Carney has announced a new agreement entitled the EU Strategic Partnership of the Future. It's a joint statement with the subtitle Enduring Partnership, Ambitious Agenda. I'm Steve Sandford, you're watching Dominion Report. Later in this video, we're going to talk about the rules-based international order, so stay tuned for that. Now, regular followers of this channel will have already heard me talking about Canada's requirement in the current geopolitical climate to strengthen relationships with the Commonwealth, with NATO, and with the EU. This is the first step toward the EU component of that. The agreement is essentially an agreement to make an agreement, or perhaps to make a series of agreements. The topics of those agreements include trade, economic security, digital transition, and addressing environmental degradation. There's also a separate security and defense agreement simply called the Security and Defense Partnership. This is described as a framework for a dialogue and cooperation in security and defense priorities. So yes, another agreement to make an agreement. The security and defense component of these Canada-EU announcements most definitely tie into Canada's subsequent NATO announcements, which I will cover in a separate video, and I'll put a link into the comments once that becomes available. Now, what does all this mean, and why are the announcements being made that are merely agreements to make agreements? It's about signaling. Let me explain. Imagine that you're part of a Canadian team negotiating with Trump's team on the new Canada-US trade agreement. You're trying to get the best deal you can for Canada. This announcement demonstrates that your country is developing trade options elsewhere, and that gives you and your team a much improved bargaining position. And that's just one example. So the agreements to make agreements are pretty much for show. But the actual agreements, once they are developed and finalized, will be for much more than that. The United States has proven itself to be an unreliable partner, and there's no guarantee that sane people will return to the White House in 2028. In fact, there's no guarantee at this point there will even be free and fair elections. But even if the MAGA component were to be ousted at that time, we have to proceed under the assumption that it could all revert back to crazy 4 years after that. So we need to withdraw our hyper-reliance on the United States. We need to extract our economy from theirs as much as we can. And this is what's happening. Now, one thing I noticed that is littered throughout all of the documents is the term rules-based international order. This term refers to the collective structure of the world's democratic and prosperous countries as it has existed since World War II. And there's general agreement to partner on trade and security issues, and there's generally respect for each other's sovereignty. Now, this time frame has coincided with the most prosperous period in the entirety of human history. I am convinced that the inclusion of this reference is directed squarely at Donald Trump. As the president of the democracy that, at least it mostly still is a democracy for the moment, as the president of that democracy, which has traditionally had the largest GDP and the biggest military, his actions are very much threatening to upset that rules-based international order. There are more announcements from Carney, specifically regarding defense spending and NATO commitments. So go ahead and subscribe if you don't want to miss my separate video covering that.